Thank you so much for joining me for episode 2 of the Betterment project. So what am I talking about? What is the project? 4 things I can say about this project are that it is a principle, a paradigm, a method, and a behavior. So what do I mean? What is the principle? Number 1, the primary principle, if I could sum this project up into one word, it would be humility. Now, I talked a little bit about humility in my first video, which I hope you watched. Humility is basically just the idea that we are not gods. We cannot reliably know everything around us. When we see things, we only see kind of our brain's construction of what it interprets our eyes as seen, which is vastly complicated. And it's such a complicated world, we have to constantly edit things and simplify things. So we don't know what we don't know. We don't understand what we don't understand. There are vast limitations on what we know and what we can confirm. So it is vastly important for us to remember that. It is the most important thing, if I'm right, if this project is correct, that we need to know. So because we cannot confirm everything, because we are limited and lacking, we have to rely on appearances of things. And that can sound horrible, that can scare people, that can be like, oh my gosh, all we have is appearances, appearances can be illusions, all that kind of thing. But we can begin building our worldview off of statements about what appears to be the case. You know, it appears to be the case that we're all human. Appears to be the case that the ground is solid, that gravity holds us down. We can talk about things rather than absolute terms, which we cannot confirm, in terms of appearances. And that is where the epistemology, if you will, of the Betterment project takes us. And the interesting thing is, because we cannot have complete certainty, we cannot be completely compelled to believe things. And you hear people talk about compelling arguments, and usually they mean something like, this seems really obvious to me right now. It's obviously the case. But compelling can be in a kind of control even, a kind of limitation in itself. The fact that we are not compelled to believe things gives us a kind of freedom to choose what primary core values we will live by and why. The method of the Betterment Project is to help people find their core values, either the ones that spring from their personality, from who they are as individuals, or ideally, as well as that, values that will allow us all to get along together without harming each other and without too badly offending each other. Offense it's inevitable. Offense is basically a disagreement, according to the Betterment Project. Why does it frame it that way? Why not try to get rid of offense? Because you can't. If we disagree, we're going to offend each other. So it's something that we will just have to be strong enough to respond in a civil fashion to offense. All right, so that's a pretty good rundown of the principle of humility. There's a lot more I can and probably will say about it, but let's go to the second of the 4, which is a paradigm. Paradigm is something like the way you see the world. And the paradigm that the Betterment Project brings to the table is what I referred to also in my first video, which is systems, versus seeing the world in terms of singular cause and effect chains. The only way you really get a true singular cause-effect chain is in a laboratory situation, which is fine. That's a great way of abstracting from the real world, isolating a string of events, and knowing what the immediate causal chain is. That's really important. That's allowed us to make video cameras and YouTube and things like this. So that's great stuff. The problem is the real world is vastly more complicated than a experimental lab situation. And when you have that many parallel causal chains working, and not just going in singular linear lines, but more like webs that are, like the waves of a web, or the waves on the surface of water. There's just so much happening. We have to be able to think that way, and the Betterment Project has some ideas of how we can do that. So singulars, just to give you a better idea of what I'm talking about, a way of looking at humanity in a systemic way is to say we are all humans as a system. There are different groups, but the most important thing is that we are all human. Yeah, I'll talk about that. If you can imagine 2 points, one is I am me and I am human. These are the 2 points where we can all most fully connect. The more you talk about I am part of this group, or I'm part of that job, or I am interested in these things, the further away we get from other people. So, if the other person is like this and we're like this, then if we're talking about what we have in common as a human being and what we want to share with each other as an individual, those are the points of contact. The more we focus on, well, I'm a part of this group, I'm black, I'm white, the further away we get from each other. We don't want that. We don't want that. We want to be able to get along, not have continual conflict. Conflict resolution is a big part of what the Betterment Project does, and one of the ways it does that is by helping us look at each other as systems, not as tribes, not as red versus blue, black versus white. And isn't it more like brown versus tan, or pink in my case? So because we are looking in terms of systems and not in singulars, that means there are alternatives. Our world is full of alternatives, and that's fine, but we have to know how to get along with each other with our alternatives. Are we going to use force? Are we going to use government to make laws against each other? I don't want to get started in it, but I'm really appalled at where our politics are at this point. We can't seem to talk to each other. We talk past each other. Betterment Project is aiming at ways to stop talking past each other and start hearing each other out and start learning what we can from each other. Okay, so a principle, a paradigm, thirdly, a method. So the method is what I call the category system. The category system is something like, and this is kind of a big claim, but it's kind of like a critical thinking 2.0. Instead of, you take a critical thinking class, what you are going to learn is lots and lots of principles. You're going to learn fallacies. You're going to learn different rules of logic, things like that. What the category system does, the method of the category system, if you will, does, is give us a set of principles that, rather than something you have to integrate and figure out how to use yourself, it tells you how everything works together. So the method of the category system does not even talk about fallacies as such, although they're not falsified or anything like that. It actually shows you more deeply what the limitations and applications of fallacies are by showing you the structure, the overall structure of how our minds, well, maybe not so much how our minds work, but let's put it this way, a tool for how our minds work, a model. It could be wrong. Humility is the first principle. The whole project could be wrong, but in looking at how it's wrong, it also is a process of, well, how can we fix that? And what I think differentiates the Betterment Project from any other method of problem solving before is that it is self-critical, it is self-deconstructive. It says, okay, that could be a problem. Let's find out if it's a problem, but then let's see if we can fix it. So in order to help give an example of what the category system is like, I thought I might tell a story briefly of how I came up with the idea, which started as the category system. And then later I was like, well, this is actually kind of a big deal. We could package this epistemological tool called the category system into a larger project. And then we would be able to talk about ethics and not just epistemology. So 8 years ago, something like that, I was listening to a debate between two people, a Christian and an atheist, in which they were totally talking past each other. We're not even trying to hear each other in a deep way. You know, they were responding in a very surface way to each other's questions. The responses to arguments were more like parries, like I'm not taking the full impact of this. It was more of a knocking of the ideas to the side rather than addressing the ideas in a deep, understood way. And I just found it really frustrating. I even found it disturbing, and of course I've heard it 100 times. But this time, it just struck me suddenly that, now wait a minute. What if there was a way of hearing each other out in such a way that, well, better yet, what if there was a system behind the way we think, a meta-scaffolding, if you will, that can show where all our ideas hang in space, if you will, in relationship to each other, how they connect, a method of defining the fabric of our belief systems. I know, that sounds crazy. Well, I did take 4 years to figure it out, but I think I did. I think I did. And it's kind of a big deal, and I hope you will go on this journey with me. I hope you will learn the method of the category system and begin applying it through the Betterment project. Okay, so that's a quick rundown of the method. Again, I'll have an episode of that very soon. The fourth, a principle, a paradigm, a method. Fourthly, a behavior. And the behavior is what I call solution ethics. There's a reason I call it solution ethics because, of course, we're trying to solve problems. Particularly the kind of meta-category problem of why humanity has problems in the first place. What is it about humanity that makes it so that we tend to fight each other and argue and try to take or force our beliefs on each other? That will be an entire episode, by the way. So solution ethics is basically about, again, how we can look at humanity as a holistic system, not just as individuals. Again, if we were looking at just individuals, that would be a singular way of looking at it. But as individuals and groups and society and a race and a biological whole. How we relate to our environment even, how lacks in our environment create poverty and other problems and differences. So I guess I don't want to get too far into solution ethics because there's a lot of other pieces I have to get involved in before I can talk too deeply about it. I'll just say that kind of if you wanted to try to summarize solution ethics, it would be that what we want to do is minimize harm, which I would define as something that somehow subtracts from a person's life. Minimize harm and minimize offense. Now you can't eliminate offense. You probably can't even eliminate harm given the world we live in. But it's about systemically looking about how we can minimize these things. Okay. So that's our 4 ways of summarizing what the project does. Another thing that might help is talking about practically what does the project look like if you're going through it, if you're using it in your everyday life, which it might take quite a while before we can actually use the project in everyday life because at least the way I'm envisioning it, this would be actually a kind of a movement almost. It would start as an intellectual process, but as we categorize human knowledge, human experience, human understanding, this idea of a method of the category system is really a way of mapping our beliefs, putting them all together in one whole, not just my belief versus your belief, which is kind of conflict, but problem solving. What do we have in common? Instead of looking about what we disagree about, let's look about what we have in common. Let's create a commons we can all agree on. And it's something I got a little bit off on in my first video. Was I started considering the commons as almost a vote. And that's completely wrong. I'm kind of embarrassed that I got sidetracked. It's easy to do, though. The commons is not about what we all vote to agree on, like a democracy. The commons is about, I gotta look something up. So just to talk a little bit more about the commons, to try to suss that out a little bit more. It's important for us to know what we can agree on. And it's not about what we vote about agreeing on. It's about what can we determine in a kind of logical process that we could agree on given certain things. Things like what could a person whose senses are working correctly, whose ability to perceive reality appears to be like everybody else's, things like that. What would they perceive if they had certain basic understandings that we've discovered, that we've been able to define in kind of a scientific way about the universe? If they know these things, what are the things we can say? What are the things we can all say is true about the universe and about our lives and about humanity as a whole, about animals, about how we interact with everything? So it's important to know that the commons is legion. It can be infinitely subdivided around various core assumptions. And depending on what the future of humanity and our scientific exploration has to offer, the commons could completely change. It's not an absolute any more than anything else is. It is still under the humility principle. And so we could make a commons of naturalism with the minimal amount of naturalistic assumptions involved. Then you can go further until you've gotten yourself into not a commons, but into atheism. Or you could have a commons of, a 10th century Indian in America, American Indian. You could build any of those commons. What would these people have in common given their circumstances? And then as you add on more complexity, you begin to get into individual and group belief systems. Things like Christianity, atheism, Hinduism, etc. Okay, to get us back on track, I was going to talk about a practical outline. So to get an idea of what the project would look like for somebody that's just going through it, you would start with a humbling phase, which, as you could imagine, based off of what I've been talking about, the principles of the project are, this means looking at your core beliefs, looking at how all your beliefs are hanging off of those core beliefs, and saying, I could be wrong about all of this. Those core values, those core assumptions could be wrong. What do I mean by core values? I guess I should define that. So for instance, in math, all of math hangs on a set of core axioms. You cannot do math without those core axioms, and if you want, you can, in fact, add axioms or take them away, and you get a completely different math, but so far as we can tell, you can often apply those different maths, if you will, in different ways. You can use them as a game. I think I heard that there was, I shouldn't talk about this, but because it's off key, but I think I heard that there was a theoretical math somebody was inventing and didn't think it applied to anything in reality, And then one day, a group of astronomers discovered this guy through Google or something like that, and were saying that your theoretical math perfectly models our observation of this astronomical phenomenon, or whatever it was. Really cool. But we also have axioms that we use in everyday life, things like our ethics, things like what do you believe the ultimate story of the world is, and how you come to know things. So there is a axiom of naturalism and an axiom of the scientific method. I consider those two very different things, and I'll explain why in another episode. Any of those axioms could be wrong. We are committing to them, or we are assuming them, or we are assuming that they are true without even realize we are assuming they are true. Those are kind of the three options so far as I can tell. A commitment would be something like what a lot of belief systems say is a faith, whereas an assumption is more like, I don't know why it's true, I have no idea, but it works. It's more practical. Okay, so moving on, number one is your humbling phase, where you're recognizing that everything you know to be true could be wrong. But that's not scary, that's an opportunity. That's important to know. We're all in the same boat in this, and we can all help each other discover what is true. Number two is the completing phase, and the completing phase is using the category method to create a category system. And so we've already talked about a lot about that. It's organizing, it's innovating, it's enabling infrastructure to be built that will allow us to come together around a commons. You know, the commons, this idea of building a commons, is kind of an infrastructure. I haven't talked about it yet, but the method the category system uses to organize information builds it into a coherent, logical structure. It's unlike a library or a dictionary, which often defines things in circular ways. You know, you'll read about one term and it'll tell you what it means, but you'll go, well, but I'm not clear. I'll look up that term, and you go to that term, and you find that that definition uses the term you looked up the first time. So it's like a circular definition. Now, generally, we can get an idea after 2 or 3 iterations, looking up different words, what a word means. Dictionaries do an okay job at that. But the category system is about defining things in a purely logical method. Again, in a humble method, in a recognition that any of these definitions could be wrong, but I mean, we're talking definitions. There's a very real sense in that you can define something as true, and as long as it appears to be the case, then it is true. Definitions are just how we dice up the world. It's what category you put things in. All right, so that's the completing phase in brief. Humbling phase, completing phase. Next is critiquing phase. What is critiquing? Of course, it is saying, I see a problem here, but unlike in a conflict method, I'm going to win, you're going to lose type of method, the category system, the Betterment project with the category system is about finding the problems so we can solve them. So far as I can tell, it is always possible to hold on to your core values and modify your kind of sub-values to fit reality. That will not likely sit well with certain kind of fundamental belief systems, but there's room in the category system for that as well. It's just that you kind of got a mark against you if you're a fundamentalist whose fundamentals are against something that fundamentally appears to be true of reality. If you're a flat earther, that's pretty fundamentally establishably wrong. I don't know how you could believe that, but you can commit to that if you really want to. Good luck with that. That's all I can say. I will do my best to respect you. I don't know how to respect that, but I will try, because that's what the project is about. It's about enabling us to stop the conflict so that we can get down to business of living together, being as productive a race as possible. I keep saying race instead of not race, not organism, but what is the term? We are all humans. We are a group. We are a species. Species. Okay, so it's about getting along, right? As a species, so that we can all survive, so that we can all enjoy our lives the best as possible. Everybody wins, right? Hopefully, ideally, it's going to be a lot of work. It's not going to be easy. We'll make mistakes. But the Betterment Project is about finding the methods, the processes that will maximize our species' survival and enjoyment of life, so to speak. So, humbling, completing, critiquing, which again is just showing what could be wrong. And of course, next is improving. How can we innovate solutions that are coherent, that are rational? Not rational, of course, in the sense of you have to obey these axioms that I've decided everyone are rational for everyone. But how are they consistent? Is your belief consistent? Does it not, in strong ways, disregard the appearances of our world? Or if it does disregard the appearances of our world, does it do so in an internally consistent way? If you can do that, if you can build a consistent belief system and it doesn't harm others by saying, well, part of my fundamental beliefs is that I get to kill all black people. Hey, that's a problem. We're not going to do that. You're talking about doing damage to our species. Those are my people because they are my species. And you can't do that. So you can't do that. Okay, that's getting into the ethics. I guess I won't get into that today. I'm very tempted to, but I won't. Okay, so humbling, completing, critiquing, improving, action. So one of the big issues of the Betterment Project is not only how our ideals, our core values, which, by the way, a core value doesn't necessarily mean our ideals. A core value could be keeping care of your kids. You know, that kid right there. That's utterly and completely practical. It's utterly in the here and now. It's completely not ideal. But it probably connects to your ideals. So how are you going to do that? That's what the action phase is about. It's about making plans. It is about making sure your policies, your plans, your goals will do what you want them to, will actually fulfill your values. It's very important to be able to make those kind of plans. What is in the way of your actions fulfilling your values? Can you take responsibility and change that? Are there people that are willing to help you do that? And to what degree can they help you in a way that is beneficial to all, especially you? You know, we don't want to enable people in such a way that they can't grow up and become their own strong individuals. It's very important for our species as to survive, for us to all be able to pull our weight to the maximum ability we can. Otherwise, we're being inefficient. And by efficiency, I don't mean something like, well, it's just being a little bit more efficient. No. Efficiency is the difference between barely surviving, diseased, hungry, and in a cave, and living in an advanced civilization in space. Efficiency is about how can we use our resources to the maximum way so that everybody wins. It is not about baby step, although it's millions of baby steps really added together to reach us as high as we can possibly go. It's not about taking away freedoms. Again, this is a negotiation, and every individual's core values matter. Okay, so we've gone through humbling, completing, critiquing, improving, and action. And you could just say repeat ad nauseum. Keep doing each of these steps. Don't neglect any of these steps. That would be a practical way of describing the Betterment project. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to do for this, hopefully last of my outline and introductory podcasts and YouTube videos. I hope keep watching. I will hopefully be getting into so much more interesting things. There will definitely be a few more technical episodes. I've got at least 6 technical episodes to get through before I can start talking about big, wonderfully complex and controversial topics, showing off what I think the Betterment Project is able to do for us, and seeing if you even agree with me or can agree with me. As always, let's have a conversation here. I know there's not much to talk about yet, but go ahead and throw at me your objections. Don't expect me to freak out. I'd appreciate it if you'd keep it civilized. If you think this all sounds ridiculous, okay, give me a specific reason why. And keep in mind that you haven't heard the full layout of the project yet. Hopefully you'll join me to learn those things, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.